It never ceases to amaze me how this administration will create a problem and then come up with some fake solution to pretend like it would make any difference at all, while simply just distracting from the underlying cause in the first place. Hey, what's going on everyone? It's Griffin here, and as someone who's been a renter for many years, while then also having had the opportunity to purchase a home a couple of years ago and being a landlord to this day, well, I think I'm a pretty well-rounded source of knowledge and experience when it comes to Canadian property and some of the solutions that could help actually tackle the problem at hand, which unfortunately seem to be an area that the current administration lacks comprehension in, as evidenced by their incessant launch of, let's just call them futile programs, where these initiatives merely masquerade as solutions while failing to enact any tangible change or facilitate renters in their journey towards homeownership. So in recent news, as we can read here, the Fed has now proposed a Canadian Renters Bill of Rights, as they call it, which would essentially reward renters for making on-time payments, positively impacting their credit score, in a similar way to how homeowners have their mortgage loan impact their credit score, of course. And this is among other features that this new Tenant Bill of Rights would implement. Let's take a look. And if I could simply ask you to leave a like on this video, that would be highly appreciated. Let's briefly watch a video of Justin Trudeau announcing this new Bill of Tenant Rights in Vancouver a couple of days ago to get a bit more context on what's being vaguely proposed.
Nearly 2/3 of young Canadians rent their homes, and they spend a greater share of their income on housing than other generations. And in cities like Vancouver, where we are today, this is even more true. This is the most expensive city to rent in the country. Renters matter, and young Canadians put a lot of their hard-earned money towards rent. We think that should count for a lot more. So today we're announcing new protections for renters and new pathways to home ownership. As part of our upcoming budget, we're going to create a Canadian Renters Bill of Rights. It would create a nationwide standard for lease agreements, give renters a clear history of apartment pricing so they can bargain fairly, and make sure they have more agency. We're also going to launch a new legal aid fund that will protect tenants against unfairly rising rents, rent evictions, and bad landlords. And finally, we're going to help you make your rent count towards you becoming a homeowner. We'll do that by making sure that the fact that you pay your rent every month, which remember is a pretty significant amount of money, that payment and that demonstrated reliability that you've shown over months and years is taken into account when you apply for a mortgage. We're going to amend the Canadian Mortgage Charter and call on landlords, banks, credit bureaus, and others to make sure that your rental history is taken into account in your credit score. This will make it easier to qualify for a mortgage or even qualify you at a lower rate. And just think about all the other things that'll come from having a better credit score. A loan to help you start a small business, for example.
All right, so as with basically all statements from this guy, the actual elements themselves are very vague for now, to say the least, but there's still quite a bit to unpack here, so let's break this down. Okay, so first and foremost, he mentions a Bill of Rights that will create a nationwide standard, as he calls it, for lease agreements and give renters a clear history of apartment pricing so that they can then bargain fairly with their landlords on rent price. Now, to me, a couple of things come up immediately that would need further clarification, otherwise they just don't make any sense at all. So anyone who's a renter knows that lease agreements are provincial documents that are signed between the landlord and the tenants, and then disputes that may arise between the parties are brought before the provincial body for housing regulation, which is different per province. In Ontario, it's the Landlord and Tenant Board. In Quebec, it's the Tribunal Administratif du Logement. You get the picture here, but But the thing is, what I'm hearing here is that now the federal government will also try to have a hand in what was otherwise a provincially regulated issue, which, as we know, only leads to more costs and more bureaucracy, which is the last thing that's needed in this particular facet of provincial regulations, which is already struggling to be efficient. Most disputes and issues at these housing boards already take over 6 months to resolve, and best believe it's not an initiative launched by Justin Trudeau's administration that'll make it any quicker. And now also implementing a nationwide standard for lease agreements sounds like another bureaucratic nightmare that'll ultimately just cost the taxpayer millions of dollars to implement, like a ride can. But that's just my take on things as having been a renter and a landlord to this day. What do you think though? Make sure to comment your thoughts down below. Now, the second part of this statement has to do with giving renters a clear history, as they say, of apartment pricing so that they can apparently bargain fairly with their landlords. And, to me, this just sounds like a grade school solution that was thought up by someone who's never actually been in a renter's shoes in this current rental environment that is much tougher than it's ever been before. At the end of the day, do renters today who are faced with high rents care if 5 years ago the units rented for 40% less? Probably not, and rents are already high to begin with right now at the time of implementing this new solution, let's call it. So it's not like a strict rent control policy would even have a huge impact moving forward. If that were even the case, that's not even what they're proposing, but this is because prices are already extremely high to begin with. Now, most of you already know that there are a couple of main reasons why rents have increased so dramatically over the past couple of years across Canada. And these are mainly too much demand and not enough supply in the market. It's really as simple as that. And this is for reasons that we've covered thoroughly on the channel. And the fact that this government doesn't seem to understand basic economics is a scary thought, to say the least. Truly, that's already been felt across the economy nationwide. And it's just so hypocritical that he'll stand up there in Vancouver in front of a bunch of renters paying, $3,000 a month for a one-bedroom apartment and make statements like nearly 2/3 of young Canadians rent their homes and they spend a greater share of their income on housing than other generations. Like, yeah, no duh. And other statements like, you make up the largest share of our age population, you work hard, you're the heartbeat of the economy. Yet then be the same government that's just increased the Canadian population by another million residents now in only the past 9 months, which is a direct issue contributing to the cost of rents rising, because we simply cannot build enough homes to accommodate. Like, you can't make this up. But anyways, back to the proposed history on apartment pricing. I think they'll have a much harder time than they think accurately regulating this, especially on the smaller scale for smaller landlords. But even if they do, what's being proposed here would only allow renters to bargain fairly with landlords. But that's rendered completely worthless when every rental unit has 100 applications for it on the first day. Again, way too much demand for the supply available, which cuts competition and ultimately drives up price. All right, moving into the second main point that was highlighted during the press conference, Justin Trudeau really tried to make himself relatable to renters who are paying $3,000 a month for a one-bedroom apartment in Vancouver, even though he's worth over $100 million, and saying that renters should be given kudos for making their rent payments on time, and that this should be reflected over into their credit score. Now, right off the bat, I'll say that, sure, I don't actually think this is a bad idea at all, in theory, and that sure, rent payments could very well impact a renter's credit score, but this would be both positively in the light that he's projecting, but then also negatively potentially, and this could very well become a double-edged sword for some renters who struggle to make those extremely high rent payments. Because here's the thing, if you miss your credit card payments or your line of credit payments, that immediately has an impact on your credit score. So I don't know how this would be implemented and rewired into the calculation for calculating the credit score, but if it's similar to how other payments are calculated and accounted for, then missing 1 or 2 payments could be very detrimental as well. But when you then take 2 seconds to actually even think about this, well, it becomes a complete distraction from the real issue at hand once again, which is that lack of inventory now and through to past 2030 anyways, which is data provided by the Canadian Mortgage and Housing Corporation. This isn't just random data. Now, he knows that the millions of young people who will be voting in the next election are disappointed with the cost of living. And I see this as just a futile attempt to make renters right now believe that it'll ever benefit them in the first place. And the reason why I say this is twofold. First off, credit scores are calculated by taking into account a multitude of different factors as seen from this chart, with each factor having a different weighting as to its importance towards the credit score. And you'll notice that payment history accounts for 35% of the weighting, which does happen to be the largest. But keep in mind, this accounts for everything. So your credit card payments, your car payments, student loan payments, etc., etc. So on-time rent payments would at the most probably have maybe 10% impact on the credit score, which in the big picture isn't really that significant. And as a renter, you can have a fantastic credit score anyways by simply making all of your credit card payments on time. So this, again, I think is just a ridiculous distraction. And for the record, I actually even had a better credit score when I was a renter. So this is completely debunked as a meaningful initiative. And the second reason why this is pointless is because having a great credit score is irrelevant to purchase a home when prices are so high that you can't even qualify for the debt in the first place. We'll take the example of Vancouver because this is where the press conference took place. The average condo, let alone standalone house, the average condo sells for $830,000. So let's even pretend like the average person here could ever save up $166K while, paying $4K a month for rent, let alone all the other monthly expenses. Well, that still leaves that individual with a mortgage of $664,000, which at current 5-year fixed interest rates of, let's even just say 5%, that puts the monthly mortgage payment alone at over $3,800, which would require income of well over 6 figures to even qualify for this debt in the first place. And again, that's without taking into account other debts like student loans, personal lines of credit, or any other debts that will also contribute to tanking the debt to income ratio of a potential future homeowner even further. So yeah, this is honestly a very poor initiative that's downright, even I would say, dishonest to renters in pretending like any of this will ever make a difference, when truly many renters, especially younger individuals, will never even be able to qualify at the current price points, even with a great credit score. That's the least of the worries. To cap things off here, I want to make this very clear that I do actually believe that leveling out the playing field and making it somewhat fairer for Canadians of all walks of life to afford a home one day should absolutely be a goal that we strive for as a nation. And the tenants who do live in subpar conditions due to landlord negligence should of course be in a position to receive added aid. But the reality is that while the government and media often try to portray landlords as evil capitalists, most renters aren't in a position where the landlord's a total jerk. That's not the problem. They're just subject to the crazy high rent prices imposed due to landlords pricing their units at a price ultimately dictated by the market. Just like any other product, there is not enough supply and the demand is extremely high, which drives up the price of, let's call them what they are, products. Units are products offered by companies and individual landlords. Well, that's what ends up happening. The price goes up if there isn't a real plan in place to increase the supply. So to me, if the government actually cared about rental and housing affordability, along with the ability for renters to ever accumulate a down payment, they'd start by implementing certain measures like the following: not further increasing carbon taxes on Canadians who are already struggling financially, which of course means a lower ability also to save towards a down payment. Actually investing back into the Canadian economy to create more competitiveness and increases in GDP growth, right? I made a video on how Canada is dead last in the G7 for GDP growth per capita, as there's just less and less investment into Canadian research and development, infrastructure, machinery, etc. And finally, the most important factor by a mile, actually investing back into municipalities to increase their ability to issue out more for building permits. It's one thing to rezone, fine, but when the permitting team takes a year to issue out permits, this is a huge bottleneck that I've mentioned far too many times on the channel. So there you have it. I'd love to know what your thoughts are on the new Bill of Tenants' Rights. Don't be shy, leave a comment down below. And if you want to learn more about some of Canada's other issues right now, along with my thoughts on them, make sure to check out one of these two videos. Also, as always, don't miss out on the sign-up bonuses and high interest on your savings using the link down below in this video's description. So thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.